You're listening to Good Morning Sumter.
And you certainly are. Welcome back on this Thursday morning here on the Good Morning Sumter Show. And also, we want to say hello to our friends listening by simulcast on our sister station, Z95.5. We're having a debate in conjunction with our friends at the Item right now, Item and Miller Communications. And we did one, of course, Tuesday night over in Manning at the F.E. DuBose Center for the Senate District 36 candidates. And we're having one here on the radio this morning for District 35. We have our guest with us, Thomas McElveen, who is a Democrat for that seat, and also Tony Barwick, who is a Republican, and my very good friend, Braden Punch, the business editor for the Item. And Braden, we're going to get started by letting you kind of give some of the ground rules for the next hour and what we're going to be doing.
All right, fair enough. Gentlemen, once again, good morning. Good to see you. Like we talked about before we went on air, we know we've got a debate with y'all on the 30th as well over at the Health Science Center downtown. So today we're going to try to be a little bit more conversational. We're not going to hold you to any kind of stringent timelines or anything. We're going to give you a chance to give an opening statement. We're going to ask you some questions. We'll have to take a couple of breaks, and then we'll come back to you for some closing statements, and we'll go from there. It's not going to be a situation where we say you've got 60 seconds or anything like that, but we are, in the interest of fairness, going to try to watch the time, make sure that y'all each get an equal amount of time. Since that's what we've got planned, why don't we go ahead and get it rolling?
All right. You can ask the first question.
Well, let's let them have their opening statements.
Okay,
so Thomas, why don't we go ahead and start with you? Go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Braden, and it's good to be here again today, and certainly appreciate you guys having us, and thanks, Braden Bunch, for being here, and Derek Burris. Listen to you guys talk on the radio and watch you guys in action. I wish I had a radio voice like that. You guys sound good, and I'm sure Tony and I will aspire to sound as good as y'all today. But thanks, everyone, for listening today. And, of course, I'm Thomas McElveen. I'm one of the candidates for the South Carolina State Senate District 35, which now covers portions of Sumter, Lee, Kershaw, and Richland counties. And, briefly since February, I've been making good on my promise to get out there and to work hard and to connect with voters. And we've knocked on probably 5,500 doors, and I'm out there showing people, that I'll work hard for them, and that I'll be accessible, and that I'll be someone that'll listen to them and work hard for them. And of course, since I got in this race back in February, I've been talking about issues that we care about. I've been listening to people in this district, and the things that they care about are bringing more jobs to this area. We're off to a running start in Sumter with some of the things we have going on, and I'm sure we'll discuss some of those things today, but we got to keep building on that. And of course, in this state, public education, making our public education system better is something we've got to start building on. We've needed to start building on that for a long time, and we need to elect people who have the courage to possibly start coming up with long-term solutions to what have been long-term problems. And I'm sure we'll talk about that also. And the third thing I want to talk about a good bit today, hopefully, is ethics reform. It seems we're reading more about scandals right now in the paper than we are about progress. That's a problem. We had an Operation Lost Trust back, I believe, in the late 80s, early 90s, around then, and a lot of folks have said that we're a few steps from that right now, and we certainly don't want that embarrassment in our state. We don't need that to happen. But those are some of the things I'm interested in talking about, and there's about 18, 19 days left before Election Day, and and I'm going to keep working hard and doing what we have to do to get there. And of course, again, great to be here today, and I'm going to ask everyone that's listening in for their vote. I'll probably ask for it again. I'm sure Tony probably will too before the day's over with. But thanks again for having us.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Tony, your turn at the mic. Go right ahead.
Thank you, Thomas. Derek, I want to thank you. I want to thank Braden. I want to make sure I mention Miller Communications and the Item. They led the ways. We need this opportunity to come before the public, be vetted before the public, and answer your questions. So we thank y'all for listening in today at home. We really appreciate this opportunity. I'm Tony Barwick. I'm the Republican candidate for State Senate District 35. You've seen my signs. Barwick means business. Now, let me tell you, those just aren't words on a sign to me. That's who I am. And I honestly believe that we are at a point where the number one issue is jobs. Now, I believe that I am the candidate who is most qualified, who has proven track record to create jobs. I've run several businesses in here in Sumter. I think most people know by now I own Palmetto Pigeon Plant. I'm with some partners, and we own the Southern State Store, and we've done some other business activities here in town, and I'm passionate about business. And I think we need a senator with that kind of passion and that kind of experience going forward. And it's one of the reasons I've decided to run. I want every individual to have the same opportunities I've had. And I want to go over to South Carolina State House, and I want to go to work for you. I want to make sure we pave the way in this state to be the manufacturing service industry leader in our country, and we're on the way to do that. Here's how I think we do it. We've got to have the strongest public education system that we can possibly have. Folks, we need vocational education back in our schools. We don't need it to start in 11th grade. We need it to start in 9th grade. We need to make sure that we have kids prepared whatever they have a passion for. Not all kids have a passion and a plan. They're going to go to college. Maybe they want to be a welder. Maybe they want to be a great diesel mechanic. We have diesel mechanic technicians in South Carolina making $100,000 a year. Let's make sure that we have no children left behind and that we meet the needs of every child that comes through our education system. And I think we've got to invest those funds in those kids. The money that we put in education should be targeted to the kid and what their desires are, what their pursuit of happiness actually is. And then lastly, and I'll close on this is about serving people. We have a big district. Thomas and I have talked about it. And we cover from the tip of Lee County to the lower part of Sumter County. We have Kershaw County, Richland County. We have a vast district. It's about serving the people of this district, and that'll be a priority for me. I do want to ask you for your vote on November 6th. It is super critical at this time that we put the right guy from District 35 into the state Senate, and I believe I'm that person, and I want to ask for your vote. And I look forward to serving you, and we're going to have a good time at this debate. And thank you for listening again.
All right. Thank you very much, Tony. And for those of y'all listening, just in case we may have had a little bit of a mic issue there, thanks for adapting on the fly there with us, Tony, as well. Let's go ahead and get to the first question. And while we're at it, what I'd like to do first is go ahead and grab the mics. That'll be fine. It makes it a little bit more comfortable.
I feel like I'm getting ready to sing.
Don't do that. Don't do that.
I might pipe in with you if you
This could be the first duet in a debate. That'd be awesome. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about political affiliations. Thomas, you're the Democratic candidate for office, but at the same time, your campaign materials, your website, they don't use the word Democrat. And at the same time, the South Carolina Senate Republicans, they're trying to point this out. In fact, they've started running ads on social media that have pictures of you and Barack Obama next to one another, describing you as the Democratic ticket. At the same time, Tony, you recently received the endorsement of the governor, but since then, right after that endorsement, you've had to make some efforts recently, kind of trying to distance yourself a little bit away from some statements that she had made about lawyers and comments along those lines. And so what I want to ask both of y'all is, when it comes to political party, where is it with your prospective parties that you feel like you have a strong stance with, and where do you feel like you differ a little bit? Thomas, where do you differ from the Democrats? Tony, where do you differ from the Republicans? Thomas, why don't we go ahead and start with you?
Well, sure. I'll respond to some of the things you said there. You know, you mentioned that I don't put party on my signs or my literature, and that's something that's been that way since February. I haven't changed anything since the primary and now in the general election. And quite frankly, Braden, party's not something I care about as much. If we're running to see who can be the biggest partisan, I'll gladly concede that point.
Sure.
But I think as a consumer and as a voter, I sit there and watch what goes on in Columbia, and it seems to me like people over there are more worried about personal agendas, partisan agendas, than they are about progress. And I'm not going to be part of that problem. During my primary, I was not running to prove to people I was the biggest Democrat in the race. I was running to prove to people that I was the best candidate in the race. And that's what I'm doing now. And I think people noticed that. During the primary, that was back on June 12th. We had huge success. And we had that success because we had not only Democrats voting, we had independents and a lot of Republican crossover. A lot of folks may know, it's no secret. My last name is McElveen. My mother was a Watson. Her parents were Gene and Burke Watson. They were big Republicans in town. And of course, my dad, he's a pretty moderate to conservative Democrat, or he was. I guess now he's a nonpartisan. But that's the influence that I had growing up. And I've got as many friends who are Republicans as I do Democrats. And there are things with the party I agree with, things I don't agree with. I don't. I believe in the sanctity of marriage between a man and a woman. If we're talking about the national platform,
sure.
I don't believe in the stance that some Democrats have taken on gay marriage. Among other things I do agree with. I think that the Democrats, especially in this state, beginning with Dick Riley, several years back, have been very strong on doing things to promote public education. That's something that I'm definitely all for. And, you mentioned also, I want to make clear to listeners today, I got some phone calls last night that a mailer went out. And I think you referenced it. A lot of people received a mail piece last night that had a big picture of my big old head and a big picture of the president's head with, I think, his logo in the middle, and it said something like, if you support President Obama, then you should vote for Thomas McElveen. I want to make it clear to folks, that did not come from my campaign. We did not send that. No one that I know sent that piece of mail. It did not come from us, and I think it's nothing but the latest attempt to nationalize a local race. We did not send that out. But, if you're going to vote for President Obama, I do think you should support me. And if you're going to vote for Governor Romney, I think you should support me because I'm the best candidate for this race, a local race from Kershaw, Sumter, Richland, and Lee counties.
Sure. And to go along, I haven't actually seen the exact mailer that you're speaking of, but we do know that, like on Facebook, there had been some social media ads that the South Carolina Republican Caucus had been putting, the Senate Republican Caucus had been putting out. So I don't believe it was associated with your campaign, Tony, specifically, and I'm pretty sure it wasn't associated with yours because you just said so. But that was one of the things that I do know is out there.
Well, I will say it was apparently paid for by the South Carolina Republican Senate Caucus, or Senate Republican Caucus.
Senate Republican Caucus, right? At least that's what the social, I don't know about the mailer, but the social ads have been that way as well. Anyway. Taking that question now over to you, Tony. Like I said, you recently received the endorsement of Governor Haley, but at that announcement, there were some things that she said that you didn't necessarily agree with, and vice versa. So, where do you stand when it comes to party lines? Where do you agree with the Republicans? Where you're like, maybe this isn't the direction I personally would go as a senator.
First of all, I'm proud to be a Republican. I put it on everything I am. If I didn't want to put it on everything I am, I would have ran as an independent. But I'm a Republican. Now, Thomas, I would have to disagree with you. If you're not going to put party labels on it, then you should run as an independent. But there's a reason you ran as a Democrat. You've always defended the Democratic candidates. You campaigned actively for President Obama. You campaigned actively for Congressman Spratt. You've been on email sites. You've been on Facebook sites doing that in the past. There's nothing wrong with that. You should have the right to support your candidate. I respect that. I respect that. But here's what I want to make sure there's a clarification. We have to know what we're getting into when we elect officials. I've made no mistake. You go to my website, there's 4 pages of my positions on issues. 4 pages. I want to be clear, and I do believe in the Republican Party and what it stands for. Now, I don't agree with every single issue. The governor and I obviously disagree on the fact whether lawyers should serve in the Senate and the House. Now, the governor said we have enough lawyers. I have no problem. I have said that from the beginning, every opportunity I have. Lawyers should serve in the Senate and in the House. My problem has been when we have lawyers that serve in the Senate and House who appoint judges, who appoint workmen's comp commissioners, and then appoint insurance boards and practice law in front of them. I'm simply saying, abstain from the vote. Do not do that, then practice law in front of them, or say, I won't practice law in front of the workmen's comp board. Justice, we have a Constitution, and we have to have complete separation of executive, legislative, and judicial. And when you have that, you take the blindfold off of our judicial system. I know they teach that in law school somewhere. There's got to be constitutional law. I just want it to be separate. And that's not my idea. That is good lawyers who come to me and told me this is something we need. The lawyers who have to stand on the other side of that issue. Governor Haley and I disagree on whether there should be lawyers serving in the Senate and House. She says we have enough. I'm just saying, let's remove that, and we'll be in a great position. Let's remove that conflict, and let's move forward. And I certainly welcome lawyers to serve and look forward to working with them when I'm over in the Senate.
All right. Very good. Gentlemen, let's take a little bit of time to talk about your personal platforms. I think both of you touched on that just a little bit in the last question. But what's the one issue that, should you be elected 4 years from now, you'd want to hang your hat on and say, I accomplished this? And Mr. Barwick, we'll start with you.
It's vocational education for me. I've been very clear. I want us to create a great job environment, and I think we do it through vocational education. Let me tell you, you ask manufacturers. I talked to the Continental HR person earlier, And I was told, listen, we're going to have an issue getting competent people for some of these manufacturing positions. Welders, they're impossible to find right now. Good qualified welders. We need a vocational education system back in our high schools. And there was a day it was in every public school. You actually started with a shop class when you were in 8th grade in home economics. Then in the 9th grade, you could choose to do vocational education classes. You also took English and mathematics and history, but you also took 2-3 vocational ed classes. 9th and grade, you would be able to take those classes. 10th grade, there would be more of an emphasis. And then when 11th grade came around, you'd be trained and you'd be ready to go to ATEC in Kershaw County, or you'd be ready to go to Career Center here in Sumter County. Let's expand those programs. Let's double the size of our vocational education system. I really believe we have a system that is flawed, and we have a lot of kids who aren't ever going to college, and we have an education system with No Child Left Behind that our focus is on getting to pass standardized tests. Well, to me, that's a mistake. That does not measure the worth of a child. That does not tell you about a child. Some kids just don't test well, but when it comes to applicational learning, they're excellent. So vocational education, to me, is a priority. We're going to create more manufacturing jobs in this state with the leadership we have in our governor and our commerce department, and Sumter's been a benefactor of it, but we've got to finish the job and expand vocational education, and that is something that I'll be very proud to accomplish in my first term.
All right, Mr. McElveen.
Well, I want my legacy as a state senator to be someone, to be known as someone who is accessible and someone who worked hard for constituent service across 4 counties, and someone who used common sense to get things done. But if you're talking about one issue, I've already referenced it one time, it's got to be ethics reform. I want to be known as someone who helped clean up the State House instead of making it worse. And we do need real wholesale changes to our ethics laws. And who can be against that? Who can be in public service and be against changing the ethics laws to make them tougher? I think, number one, we need to have an agency that's independent from the House and Senate. Right now you have a House Ethics Committee, a Senate Ethics Committee. They are policing themselves. My proposal would be to put an independent agency, probably under the auspices of the South Carolina Ethics Commission. I think that would, and give it some teeth, make them have independent authority. Number two, I think we need stronger conflict of interest laws. Right now, there's a lot of self-dealing that goes on, and I think we need to do things that will make sure that our people who are over in Columbia, are not dealing benefits to themselves, their families, and or their business associates. That's not what they're there to do. And number three, we need to start writing tougher ethics laws. We can do it. It's not hard to do. And again, I'm not sure who can be against that, but that's something that that I have some thoughts and some ideas on. It's something that I think needs some real attention before it's too late.
All right. Well, just to follow up on that a little bit, Thomas, like you said, with ethics reform, currently there's a system in place within ethics, like when candidates don't file properly or anything, and away from the situation that happened with candidates getting kicked off the ballot. There are very stringent, or not stringent, but very strong penalties for misfiling. Usually it's about $100 a day that candidates can face if they don't file. A lot of times, though, those penalties, they end up just getting thrown out the window the moment they fix their filing. Is that something that you feel like, well, maybe we should perhaps lower the amount, but make sure they're in stone, you are going to pay this? Or how exactly do you think we should handle something like that?
Well, there shouldn't really be any gray area there. But the problem, I think, is that the way the laws are written, especially this fiasco we recently had with all the filing mess, the laws are not clear and easy to understand. And that's something that, the first-term senator from District 35 can start working on, is writing a law that's better. And, since you brought up the recent fiasco with all the filing, to me it's a simple fix. You go in there and you say, okay, now that we have electronic filing, each candidate is going to file their statement of economic interest and everything else online, and then serve a hard copy on the party. Done. I mean, that's all it would take instead of these two conflicting statutes.
Sure.
But I think I think when there's penalties in place, they should be easy to understand, easy to read, and easy to know. And if you're going to be running for office, you're going to put your neck out there and put your hat in the ring. You should know the rules. We all got to play by the rules.
Sure. All right. Fair enough. Let's go ahead and follow that up with you, Tony, and let's go ahead and talk a little bit, like he mentioned, about what happened with the ethics reform, and specifically with the filing laws. Are we in a situation in South Carolina? It's 2012, but we have a lot of rural counties that sometimes electronic filing can be a trick for folks. Is that something that a direction we need to go in, or how do you think we can resolve that issue in the future?
Well, the law requires that we electronically file, and we certainly all did do that and did it in advance. Listen, I think anyone who wants to run for office, if they can't find a computer and electronically file, then personally, I don't think we're asking too much. I don't think we're asking too much someone to show their ID when they go to vote. I think there's some simple things that we can expect out of people, and we should expect that. Let me tell you, the problem is we've got legislators writing volumes and volumes and volumes of laws, and they can't even interpret them. I'm appreciative of a lot of things, but I want to write every law where a guy that graduates from high school can understand it. I shouldn't have to hire a lawyer to interpret it, which I did have to hire a lawyer to interpret it, and I'm thankful for him. But that's just the craziness of our legal system sometimes, and the way we write laws is we just get flat out carried away. We get carried away. We forget who we're representing and who we're writing those laws for, and we need to simplify our tax code system. We need to simplify our legal system where anyone can understand that, and I certainly will be a proponent of that. I was talking to someone, and they had to take their real estate license, and they said you weren't allowed to puff when selling property, and he said that's just the craziest word I've ever heard. He said, I didn't know what it meant. He said, I thought we weren't allowed to smoke cigarettes when we sold property. Well, what puffing meant in the legal terms was you're not allowed to exaggerate. Well, why not just take the word puffing out and write in the word exaggerate? Listen, we've got to have a legal system where we spell it out to where every person who graduates from high school can read it and understand it and can abide by the law. Now, let's talk about ethics reform. I want to refer to something that Thomas said. He talked about conflicts of interest. I certainly agree, and I want to take that back to my statement about lawyers not voting in the Senate and the House for judges and workmen's comp members and insurance board members and so forth that they're going to represent before in law. And I believe with all my heart that is a conflict of interest. And Thomas, I'm glad to hear you say it, and I would hope that you would be willing to support that. I think it's common sense. We've got to have ethics reform. We need to add one last thing. We need for anyone who's elected a senator or a House member to divulge all areas of their income. We've got to have that. And let me tell you, I've been successful in life, and I will divulge and I will push for that law to be passed where we have to divulge all income. We also need an oversight committee looking over all our counties and cities and all municipalities for ethics violations, not just our Senate and House.
All right, fair enough. And Thomas, just to follow up on that real quick, like he did mention, and you kind of alluded to, is that a stance that you would personally take, that specifically when dealing with workers' comp and situations like that, that if there's a senator or a House member that is a lawyer, should they exclude themselves from those boards, or is that something that you feel like, well, they have more expertise in this area, so therefore they should be able to participate as well?
Well, and I think I talked to the item about this yesterday, and some of those comments ran in the paper this morning. But, you know, just to explain to you, workers' comp commissioners are actually like administrative law judges. They are appointed by the governor, chosen by the governor, confirmed by the Senate. And, of course, I've told people before, you know, I've never handled a workers' comp case. I have never appeared before a workers' comp commission. Right. My firm does handle a small volume of workers' compensation cases. And if you look at what's going on in the Senate now, people that have the same, they're in the same position as I am, do recuse themselves from those votes because again, it's an executive appointment and it's confirmed by the Senate. Now, when you're talking about the election of judges, we don't have popular election in the state. That's a good thing. I've been actually involved with our system of electing judges, and it works. I've served as a member of the South Carolina Bar's Judicial Qualification Committee for several years now. There is a vetting and a screening process that goes on that a lot of folks don't even know about. But to say that if people in this district happen to choose a lawyer to send to Columbia, that they're going to be divested from the process of electing judges, I think is disingenuous. Sure. We've got to have trust in our senators. You know, our senators have a lot of influence over a lot of things, and I think if you're going to use the argument that lawyers should not be involved in that process, then then my opponent in this race would have to remove himself from a lot of things. Any issues with DHEC, with the Department of Agriculture, with the Department of Employment and Workforce, and the list goes on and on. We got to have trust in our senators to make sure they're going to do the right thing.
I don't stand before those boards.
Okay, before we continue on, we've got a break coming up.
Got to take a break, bottom of the hour here. Got to pay a few bills, but we will come back and continue that train of thought with our candidates here for the Senate District 35 seat between Thomas McElveen and Tony Barwick. Of course, this is being simulcast on our sister station, Z95.5. Of course, we have our friend Braden Bunch, who's actually been promoted to the assistant managing editor from the item. He's done such a good job here this morning. We've increased his pay rate there.
Yeah,
so we'll take a quick break. We will be back with more of the debate. Senate District 35 after this on Good Morning Sumter, WDXY, 1240 AM and 105.9 FM.
More from Good Morning Sumter on Sumter's home for news, talk, and sports. WDXY, 1240 AM at 105.9 FM. Now, back to Good Morning Sumter on WDXY, 1240 AM and 105.9 FM.
That's exactly right. Welcome back on your Thursday morning here on the Good Morning Sumter Show. I want to thank our friends listening on our sister station, Z95.5, to this very important debate between Tony Barwick and Thomas McElveen for the Senate District 35 seat, of course, currently held by Senator Phil Levinas, and of course, Election Day coming up on November 6th. And have here with us our good friend, Assistant Managing Editor of the item, Braden Bunch. And Braden, right before the break, we were kind of in the middle of a question, kind of talking about ethics reform and other things that kind of led into discussion. Do we want to continue with that, or?
Yeah, well, we can roll on a little bit with that. I believe we interrupted you, Tony, as we were going. But one of the things specifically about ethics reform, like you mentioned before, we were in a situation several decades ago with Operation Lost Trust, where a lot of folks basically got swept into the reform that we now have in front of our state. I guess the question is, way back then, did they go far enough, or is this a situation where the pendulum swung far enough one way and now it started to slowly creep back? Do you understand what I'm saying? Did they make enough changes to ethics reform, to campaign ethics and to politician ethics when that came up? Or has this been something that's creeped back into the system? Tony, why don't we go?
I don't think they went far enough, Braden. Let me tell you what I would have done. And they were on the right track. And the whole ballot fiasco, it's a different issue, in that there was just some additional laws written later on about filing online, and it was just some confusion, and they really just didn't dot their I's and cross their T's. They made a mistake, and I think they've all acknowledged that, and it will get fixed. I think Thomas and I both agree, if either one of us are elected, we're going to fix the ballot fiasco. But let me talk about ethics reform where they fell short. There was ethics reform. There was an attempt to do it, but then they appointed their own bodies to oversee their ethics violations. Well, no one does that. You've got to be independent. You've got to have an agency, and I'm not even sure that you do it through the South Carolina Ethics Commission. I think that's where it starts. But I think there needs to be an oversight group in this state that is totally independent and that looks at all branches of government. And I was alluding to that earlier, and we ran out of time. But I think certainly we've got to have that group look at our Senate, look at our House, look at our executive branch in this state, look at our judicial system in this state, but they also should be looking at our municipalities and our county governments. Folks, when people are being watched, when people know they're being watched, somehow magically they start doing the right thing. And I think we've got to have oversight across our state. People say, how will you pay for it? I promise you, if you're watching and you're making sure that we don't have people taking advantage of the system for their own financial gain, we'll save enough money to pay for it. And we already have a group that's doing it, and we're going to have to take care of this as soon as possible. It just didn't go far enough, but I believe there's enough momentum to finish that job as soon as we get back in the Senate, and I'll certainly be supporting that.
All right, thank you, Tony. And Thomas, once again, before we get off this issue, just back to you. Like Tony was talking about, he says that we need to have someone that's truly independent. How do you create a system, if you were to agree with that, that can be independent without any kind of side of conflict of interest if they're being appointed by the General Assembly themselves? In other words, what would be your plan to be able to create something?
The answer's pretty simple to that. You asked a second ago if they went far enough back when Operation Lost Trust happens, and the answer is no. And the biggest problem is obvious. They didn't get the fox from out in front of the hen house. The folks over in Columbia are still policing themselves in the House and the Senate. That's a problem. You hear about these headlines about people taking money and reimbursing themselves from campaign accounts, no receipts, no invoices, but nothing's ever done about it because they're policing each other. It's the good old boy system. You've heard that expression many a time before. So I think until you get the fox from out in front of the hen house, you're going to keep having these problems. There's not going to be any real accountability. But I think there does need to be transparency. That's a word that I've heard, and it almost makes me sick when I hear it now because we talk about it all the time, but nothing's ever done about it. It's just a word. And if you look at my statement of economic interest, if there was a question about disclosure, I disclosed it. Number one, each and every business I'm involved with is on there. My wife's salary is on there. It's family income because she does work for the solicitor's office. If there's a question about it, you disclose it. You don't try to hide it. People need to know. People deserve to know. And stay on this same line of thought. I'm going to take a pledge right now. Neither me nor my law firm has any sort of state contracts. Okay, we don't do state work for any state agency. Okay, and I'm not going over there to try to get that kind of work. I'll take a pledge right now that when elected, neither me nor my law firm will take any sort of contracts from state agencies. We won't do state work. Now, I'm not going to use that position to try to line my own pockets or my law partners. I'm there to serve.
All right, fair enough.
And I appreciate that, Thomas. And I think this is some area where we agree on. Ethics reform is something I think we can both say we agree on. We've got to straighten out our ethics issues.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. Derek, I think you got the next question.
I do. Let's go to education, gentlemen. The funding for Sumter School District's been a hot topic in Sumter for some time now, and the local administration asked for what some believed was a drastic tax increase to pay for the schools, and they ultimately didn't get everything they wanted from Sumter County Council. But school funding ultimately starts with the General Assembly. So tell us what direction you feel the state should take in the future as far as school funding goes. And Mr. McElveen, we'll start with you.
Well, some thoughts I have, is that school funding needs to be more fair and more equitable. I've said this since February also. There is absolutely no reason why a child that is born in Rembert and lives in Rembert should receive any less of a public education than a child that's born in Greenville or Charleston or Columbia, and the list goes on and on. Educational outcomes should not be determined based on where a child is born. I think that's unfair, and that's not the way it should be. But I think we need to concentrate our resources on the classroom, on students, because right now, my thought is simple. Teachers are on the front lines of public education. Parents should be right there with them. Resources need to go to the classroom to make sure these kids are getting the best instruction they can get, and they have the resources available to them to get that education. It's something I've thought about, and this is something I think that's been tossed around the Senate a little bit, but nothing's been done about it. When we go after these large industrial investments, such as Boeing, such as BMW, some of these Amazon, some of these big companies, we use state taxpayers' dollars to recruit these companies. But oftentimes, once they come to the state, the area where they locate, whether it's Greenville, Lexington, so on, or Charleston, so on and so forth, the money, the tax revenues that the local governments get from them go to school districts in those municipalities and areas. Why not have some of those funds be put in some sort of reserve or some sort of bank that would be distributed equitably among all schools in the state, based on a pro rata or per student ratio. All of our money goes to recruit these businesses, so why shouldn't we all get some of the benefit from it?
All right, well, fair enough. Along those lines, just real quick as a follow-up, are you saying then in this reserve bank system, if you will, that state money goes in to recruit a certain company? Does the local area pay for, send money into the school, into this bank until they've paid back the money that was spent, or do they do it in perpetuity? Which is your plan?
I would think it would go, I would say in perpetuity. It would go up to the Department of Revenue. A portion of it. Now,
sure.
It's something that's got to be studied and got to be examined. It's just an idea.
Sure.
That I'm willing to work on and to look at.
Okay, fair enough.
That's an interesting point you made, but let's talk about education funding for just a second. The problem with education funding is we passed a bill, Act 388, that put an additional sales tax on our citizens in lieu of property taxes, and it was short-sighted when it was done because it put all the burden for tax increases on our manufacturing base and on our small businesses. And that's the problem we had in Sumter. Listen, Act 388 did not go far enough, and it's created a division in our state between education, business owners, and manufacturers. And we've got to go a little further and get that fixed as soon as possible. We've tried to fix it in the Senate. We've had some difficulties doing that. It's met up with filibuster, and we've got to accomplish it. We've got to accomplish it. It'll be a spur to our business community, and it'll make education funding simpler, and we've got to do that. Now, I've read all the formulas on how education is funded, and I'm not going to get here and throw out all those initials, but there's AIE indexes, and there's all kind of factors they go in. But here's the intent, and this is where Thomas and I agree. I'm from Pinewood, South Carolina. I went to Furman High School, graduated in 1980. Folks, we were a poor little rural school. Never had air conditioning in school. Showers in the gym didn't work, but we had quality teachers. And I will tell you, and I will say this until the end of my time, those teachers made all the difference in my life, and I believe that they'll make that same difference in your life. We've come a long ways in Sumter with improving our facilities, a long ways. I say light years, and you had to be part of our school system in the 60s and 70s to understand that. But we've got a long ways still to go. The task isn't finished, and teachers are still the key. We've got to put power back in our classroom in the hands of teachers. We've got to put the power back in the hands of our principals to run our school. And listen, funding is always going to be an issue. It will always be an issue, and money's limited. But we've got to make sure what we invest in the child. That money is not there for the administrators. It's not there for anyone but the children. And that's where I'll invest my money in education and kids.
All right.
That's what I believe in. And I want to thank great teachers for when I was a kid. We had a wonderful experience at Furman High School.
All right. Very good, Braden.
Thank you, Tony. Something we've already alluded to slightly, and you're going to be talking about on the campaign stump for the next 3 weeks, and you've talked about before this, and that's jobs. We alluded to this back at our debate over for Senate 36.
Tuesday night, yeah.
Exactly. But the unemployment rate in Sumter County right now is 10.7%. It's well above the state average, and the state average is well above the national average. In fact, if you look at from a metropolitan point of view, Sumter, South Carolina has right now sitting around between the 6th and the 8th highest unemployment rate of any metropolitan area in the southeast. What can you, as a senator, do to try to bring more jobs into the area? Tony, we'll start with you.
Well, our measurable unemployment rate is around 10%, and it varies across the district. It's a little lower in Kershaw and Richland County, a little higher in Lee County. But that is our measurable unemployment rate. Braden, that pales, that's just the people that are still able to draw unemployment benefits. Our unemployment rate is much higher. We've got to put people back to work, and that's our job as senators. Here's how we do it. First step is we got to have an educational system. I've talked about vocational ed. And folks, that's a long-term investment. But short-term, what can we do right now? We've got to create a business-friendly climate in this district. We've got to get our government out the way of job creators. Our government is constantly in the way. I've had to deal with the city of Sumter, the planning commission in Sumter. You know, I've told you I've created jobs, and it's a difficult process. Let's make it easier for small business people to go out and create jobs. Let's just figure out what have we got to do, and let's get out the way and let business people go create jobs. And that's the kind of environment I'll always be actively trying to create. I want to deregulate our business industry. I don't want to continue to regulate it, and that's what I'll do if I go to South Carolina Senate. We can also make some real advancements if we'll look at our tax code. Folks, our tax code is on municipalities and small businesses. We are paying a higher rate than our neighboring states. And folks, when you're looking at moving a business into an area, you look at the tax rate. You look at it. The reason Continental Tire, and Thomas didn't mention Continental Tire earlier, one of the reasons Continental Tire came here is we gave them a fee in lieu of deal where they pay a 4% rate. Well, if it's fair for Continental Tire, it should be fair for all business people. My small little business, my 68 employees, every one of their jobs is just as important to them as the 1,700 people that will be employed at Continental. Let's watch out for all businesses in South Carolina, and let's have a fairer tax rate on our manufacturers and small businesses, and you'll see business grow. Get government out the way. Government is a hinder to business. Let's get them out the way, and businesses will take over, and we'll have a boom in this country.
All right, thank you, Tony. Thomas, your turn without a question. What exactly can we do as a senator? What can you do in office to bring about?
I'll tell you, as a former board member of the Sumter Chamber of Commerce, I fully realize that small business is the lifeblood of an economy such as ours here in Sumter. Our small businesses they've been in place for years and years and years. That's what we have here in Sumter. Lots of small business, lots of entrepreneurs. Our state government needs to be focused on making sure that we're passing policies not only to encourage entrepreneurship, but to encourage current small businesses to expand, while at the same time looking at the bigger picture. We do need jobs. Lee County, Sumter County, well below the state unemployment average. We got a lot of people to put back to work, and a fast way to do that is to recruit outside industry, outside investment. In these outside investments, such as Continental Tire that recently came here, we're glad to have them. That's a Super Bowl for Sumter. It's a game changer. It's going to put a lot of people back to work with very good paying jobs, and it's going to broaden our tax base, which is good for all of us. But I think when you go out and you talk about recruiting business and recruiting industry, they're going to look at several things. They're going to look at, is there an educated workforce in place? That's why it's absolutely important. In South Carolina, one of our greatest crown jewels is a really good technical college system. We've got to protect that. Especially in down economic times, that sort of education is cheaper for people to obtain, and they can get jobs coming out of tech school. They're also going to look at education. How are our public schools here? They're going to look at things like crime. And they're going to look at infrastructure. And I don't mind telling you, this was a tough issue for me. But back in 2006 or 2004, we tried to pass a capital penny. And I'll tell you right now, I didn't vote for it because it had, I think, a water park as the flagship, capital project.
Right.
But when it came up in 2008, I was working with the Chamber of Commerce, and I decided this is something we need to do. I looked at the projects; they were viable. So I went out with the Chamber of Commerce's initiative, and I lobbied people with the Chamber. I gave presentations to school people, to service clubs, because it's something I believed in. And the people of Sumter, even though it was a touchy issue at times, believed in it. It did pass. We invested in ourselves, which and one of the things that project did was to extend infrastructure out to the Pocatello area. And, it was something tough to go around and asking people during tough economic times, let's invest in ourselves with this capital penny. But, people did it. And I could not have been prouder to have worked on that when I stood there at the Continental Tire groundbreaking and heard the development board chairman say that if people in Sumter had not invested in themselves and passed that penny, there would be no Continental Tire.
Sure. Going along those lines, just a quick follow-up, and I'll get to both of you. But, Thomas, I want to go to you first. You've both talked about the importance of recruiting outside industry and bringing them in. The Department of Commerce, our State Department of Commerce, has a closing fund. And this past year, there was a bit of money still sitting in the pool for the closing fund that they can use to allocate to businesses to bring them in. There was proposals to actually take some of that money out of the closing fund to help balance the rest of the state's budget. Is that something that should be set aside and left alone, even if that money isn't being used for the future reference, so you've got the money there for the future? Or is that a situation where, quite frankly, you're sitting on a lot of money, use it to pay for the current needs and go on from there? What's your take on the closing fund itself?
Well, I think the best idea right now is probably to leave it there. Anyone that's in business, like I am, I own and operate, or I'm a co-owner and operator of a small business. That's what our law firm is. We have employees, we have overhead. But any business owner will tell you that, you got to spend money and know where to invest it to make money. But with a down economy, there's nothing wrong with saving money for a rainy day. Tony alluded earlier to Act 388. That's something that was passed during strong economic times. They didn't have the foresight to think about what might happen when the economy started to go south and sales tax revenues started to fall. But I think the best thing to do right now with that money is probably to leave it there, since we are in tough economic times.
All right, fair enough.
To leave it there for future investment.
Right, I understand. Yeah.
Sure.
Tony, your take on the closing fund as well?
Well, I think you go further than just the closing fund, but I would leave the money there, Braden, and you've got to have operating capital. in order to do these economic infrastructures and these studies. But there were a couple of projects I'd love to see them spend some of that money on. We've got a mega site in Sumter County, and we've got a mega site in Kershaw County that both needed some studies done, and we tried to get that through, and it did not make it. It would be something I would certainly push for. We've got to have site-ready industrial parks. So when we have someone come in and they're looking at a park, we've already got all of our research done, and I think some of that money needs to be spent. We have some real good prospects for industrial expansion in Lee County. Let's go in and get our studies done, and let's use that money that the Commerce Department had. The problem is it is so contentious to get them to spend that money. You've got to have a strong lobby from your senator in the Senate, and you've got to be able to work to get them to spend that money. And we've got some places I'd like to see us spend it. It doesn't do any good in the bank. I say sometimes if you've got a good project, let's go ahead and get the work done. So we keep the money in, but we absolutely have to look at projects that are viable, and let's invest that money when needed.
All right, thank you, Tony. I think we've got one more question.
We got time for one more question.
Kind of ties in.
And also want to remind folks we got about 5 minutes left, so we want to just give brief answers to this next question, then we'll leave you some time for closing statements. Our last question, in every general session, a large portion of legislators' time is spent on developing the state budget. Which programs do you think need additional resources from the state, and which programs do you think the state needs to cut or do away with? We'll start with Mr. Barwick, I believe.
Well, I think there's plenty of overlap. You know, right now in the state of South Carolina, there's 2 extension services. There's one at Clemson and one at South Carolina State. I don't quite understand that. There are plenty of programs in the state of South Carolina that we have overlap in. We need to go and cut those programs. Folks, you know, we've got to invest in economic infrastructure, and we need, when we have these budget surpluses, to put that money in the economic infrastructure fund, and we need to invest it wisely, because our primary responsibility, if we're elected your senators, to make sure that future generations have jobs. We got college graduates coming out of our schools right now. They're having a difficult time finding jobs. Let's invest money in it. Let's put our excess in economic infrastructure fund, and let's make sure that we're going out and spending it very wisely.
All right, Mr. McElveen.
Just briefly, you know, there's a lot of services right now and a lot of agencies in our state that are duplicative and that probably do waste a lot of money. You know, I look at the DOT. I think that we're building roads that we don't need, and I think there's a lot of fat, so to speak, that can be trimmed from the DOT. That's just one agency. But I think we need to start changing our way of thinking. You know, I've said this before. Every time I drive to Lugoff or to Elgin, you know, I pass two pretty new rest stops, one on both sides of the road. And I think about the one in Clinton that's in the middle of the highway. You know, long-term thinking like that, doing things differently, you can save money, and the money you save, you should invest in infrastructure to attract business. But, you know, as far as something we don't fund enough, I think, you know, the Clemson Extension, which is an important service for an area like this, a rural area like this district, you know, their budget's been cut. But what bothers me even more than that is right now our public universities in this state are 8% funded by the legislature, which means tuition costs have gone up. So I think those are some things we need to work on, just briefly.
All right. And
Well, yeah, I think that's going to wrap it up for our questions. We're going to give you time for closing statements. Like we said before, we're going to see you again on October 30th down at the Health Science Center downtown for a more formalized, structured debate. But let's give you each, and I think we are going to set a time limit on this one. You get 90 seconds for your closing statements this morning on the radio to tell us why folks should vote with you. Tony, why don't we start with you?
I'm Tony Barwick again. I'm Republican candidate for Senate. It's been a pleasure to be here today. Let me thank Thomas and Braden and Derek and Miller Communications, the item, for having us. It's been a pleasure, and folks, we're looking forward to more of this. We have 4 of them scheduled. We're not going to advertise them here, but get on our websites. It'll be in the item. You'll hear them on Miller Communications. Please come here us every opportunity. You deserve to have the best possible senator that we can elect. And it's a new day. It's a new day in this district, and I believe that I am the candidate that can deliver. I have a lifetime of accomplishments. I'm proud of those accomplishments, and I believe I can accomplish more when I go to the Senate if you'll see fit to vote for me on November 6th. And you just have to make a decision. You have to listen to the issues, and I agree. We need to be transparent. We need ethics reform. We need all these things. But more than anything, we need someone who believes in the people of this district, and I believe in you. I believe in you. I'm asking you now to believe in me and give me your vote on November 6th.
All right. And Mr. McElveen.
Again, I'm Thomas McElveen, and of course, I want to thank Miller Communications and the item for doing this. I want to thank Derek Burris. I want to thank Braden Bunch. And I want to thank our radio audience. The fact that you're tuning in and listening to your candidates this morning, it shows that you care. And please continue to watch our race. We are going to have several debates scheduled. In fact, I don't know when we don't have a debate. It seems like we're going to be debating and going to these forums all the time. But keep an eye on us. And I would certainly invite you to give me a call anytime. My cell phone number is 803-491-6154. And check out our website. It's just thomasmcelveen.com. Of course, we're on Facebook. It's Thomas McElveen for Senate District 35, and we're also on Twitter, T McElveen for SC. And I think that pretty much covers everything if you want to check us out. But we're going to keep talking about issues. We're going to keep working hard and getting out there and connecting with voters. And just keep an eye on the race. And we still got what's probably going to be a long 2.5 weeks. But as I have since February, I'm going to ask you for your continued trust, your continued confidence, and I'm going to ask for you to vote for me again on November 6th. And I do appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you.
Very good. Again, we're going to have to wrap things up, but we will see you again on October 30th, 6 o'clock at the Central Carolina Technical College's Allied Health Sciences building. The public's invited to attend. And also, we want to just thank our friend Braden Bunch from the item for being with us. We'll see you next Tuesday. We're going to be at City Hall.
That's right.
At the Opera House,
House, right.
We're going to be up there for a debate with the mayoral and city council candidates. That's going to be this coming Tuesday, and that's at 6 o'clock, too. Of course, we want to thank everybody for listening. Don't forget, on the show tomorrow, we'll be out at Shaw Air Force Base the entire 2 hours from the 3rd Army Headquarters building. So we're looking forward to that. In the meantime, have a great day, Sumter. We'll see you tomorrow, and peace.